Good morning, everybody. My name's John Schäuble. I'm here to help facilitate a Fire Safety Essentials meeting on behalf of the Montrose Fire Brigade this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting this morning, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and any Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here with us today. Just by way of introduction, I'm a community engagement facilitator with CFA, and I've done that for about 20 years. And in addition to that, I'm also a volunteer. So I've been a volunteer up at Sassafras, up on top of the mountains above you, for the past 35 years or so. I'm a former brigade captain and still serving as a brigade officer. So with us today, there's a couple of other people. So one is Taryn Campbell, who's the co-host of the session this morning. She'll be helping us with some of the technical aspects of the presentation. And I'd also like to welcome Rob Waters, who's the captain of the Montrose Fire Brigade, and we'll hear from Rob a little bit later in terms of some of the specific local risks to the community of Montrose. And so welcome, Rob, and we'll talk to you a bit later on. Just in terms of some housekeeping matters this morning, this is a webinar, so I can't see you. You hopefully can see me, but you will only be able to interact using the chat. So you're not able to turn your camera on or your audio. So it's not like a Zoom meeting. It's actually a webinar. So it has some sort of more limited ways of interacting. But one of the ways you can interact with us is to use the chat function, and you'll see the little icon on your screen down the bottom, and so you can use that at any time, and either Taryn or I will be able to respond to your queries using chat. One of the things you need to know about this session is that it's being recorded. However, only the presentation itself and whatever I'm saying is being recorded. So again, we can't hear or see you. So that's the extent of the recording. There'll be some engagement. We're going to use a couple of tools apart from chat. So one of the things we'll be using is polls, and so you can engage through polling. Polling will pop up some questions from time to time and ask you to respond to them. It's optional. You don't have to respond if you don't want to. You can just wait until the poll has finished and then click out of it. But it's really useful as a way of giving us some idea of what you know, and of us allowing us to interact with you and provide some useful information. So polling is completely anonymous. It doesn't record who you are. I won't be able to tell who's answering what questions, so don't worry about that. I don't even know who you are in terms of names and so on. So when you've reviewed the poll, finished the poll, close out of it, and we'll review the responses together. In terms of using the chat function, you can either chat with all of us or and ask questions. But if you need some help, you can just select all panelists on the little drop-down menu, and that will mean that either Tara and I will be able to give you a hand. Okay. So what are you going to learn today? This is a bit of a refresh from some of the programs that CFA has run in previous years, and so it's now tagged Fire Safety Essentials. And so the critical session, learnings from today's sessions will be understanding a little bit about local fire risks in the Montrose area and the foothills of the Dandenongs, what to expect from a fire if one occurs, how do you know if there is a fire, planning and decision making, and surviving if the plan fails or if you get caught out. So before we go to the next little session, I think what we'll do is run some activities using the poll. So we might just run a poll and see a little bit about you. So Taryn, we might start the first poll if we can. So just some questions here. How long have you lived in the area? How would you rate your knowledge around fire safety? So we'll give you about 30 seconds or so, and we'll see how many responses we get. going to give you more than 30 seconds. We're going to give you another 30 odd seconds to go. This might look a little bit different depending whether you're using a computer screen or a telephone, but you'll get the general gist of it. All right, we might pull it up there and share the results, yeah? Okay, so of the people that are with us today, of the people that have responded, we've got about 45% of people have lived here for more than 10 years, so you will have possibly seen a little bit of bushfire action around the place, and another 10% in the 5 to 10 years. And we've got quite a few people who have been here for less than 5 years, so around 35, 30, how's my addition? 17% for less than a year and 28% for 1 to 5 years. So that's good to know. How would you rate your knowledge? So most people are saying they have reasonable knowledge of bushfire in the area. Have you been to a CFA meeting before? And about half of people have, so that's great. So this is obviously a different CFA meeting this year, and that's been dictated a bit by COVID. So we're going to move. We've been compelled to move into this sort of virtual space, but eventually we'll go back to face-to-face meetings. But in the meantime, this is how we're going to roll. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about understanding your fire risks. Yep, Shelley, you're muted, don't worry about that. Okay, Victoria is one of the most bushfire prone parts of the world. We know that, and just up there you're seeing some slides or some photos of various parts of Victoria. So there's some forested area, there's some alpine area, there's some beach landscape, and a little bit of farmland. Pretty much all of Victoria is prone to bushfire. And today, right up in the northwest, in the Mallee area, it's a total fireban day. So all of that area along the river is already at risk of fire. Why this is much more important, perhaps this year than previously, is that pretty much most of us are going to be spending a fair chunk of our holiday time in Victoria this year. You know, I can guarantee there'd be a lot less people moving, sort of certainly internationally, but probably interstate. So there'd be a lot more movement. And I've just spent a couple of weeks up in the high country in Victoria, where we've got a family property, and people are on the move. So there are people who are moving around, caravans, you know, four-wheel drives, whatever. So people are now moving again because we can. And so it's important to understand when you're travelling through Victoria, the sort of fire landscape you're in, because it varies from place to place. We're going to talk today specifically about what the fire risk is around the Dandenongs, but just people tend to switch off a bit when they go on holidays and forget that they're actually still driving through one of the most bushfire parts of the world. I mean, the next thing that's important for us to realise, and there's a bit of a division of what Victoria looks like. So you can see we're in the central area there. So these are the bushfire warning areas. There are 9 of them. Pretty much central area covers from Ballarat to about Reefton, a crossway. So it's a big area. So that's the fire warning area that we're dealing with. But you can see there are different areas, and each of these reflects a different sort of fire risk in those places and different weather risks. So let's have a bit of a chat about the seasonal outlook for the summer. And essentially, you know, I've been to a couple of bomb briefings over the past few weeks, and this year is quite different to last year. So you think back to last year, we had a very long fire season that went from essentially from about September right through until March. So, you know, something like 7 months. By this time in Victoria, there were already fires burning in Gippsland. Having just come back from Gippsland, I can tell you it's so green out there, you'd need a flamethrower to get anything to burn. But that will change. So we're in the grip of what the meteorologists refer to as a La Nina phenomenon at the moment. And that means traditionally there's a lot more rain than normal. So we've seen that already in and around Melbourne. So Melbourne's rainfall's already hit its average. In the Dandenongs here, we've already hit our average rainfall for most years. And so we've had up on top of the hill here around 1,300 mils. So things are wet. And the suggestion is that for the next few weeks, things will continue to be wet. So we'll get a little bit more rain running into summer, which is fantastic in terms of the fire risk because it damages things right down. What it means for other parts of the state is that in the far west of the state, you'll find that there's much more potential for grass fires. You get a little more grass growth, and that will dry up more quickly than the forests. And in East Gippsland at the other end, they're still sitting on the back of 3 or 4 years of really prolonged and quite harsh drought, and so there's an underlying dryness in some of those bushland areas out to the east. So we're not without the possibility of fire. And if you think back to last year around the Dandenongs, we had a pretty good fire season. There was not much activity. The activity was all elsewhere. So we're coming into this season having had a reasonably quiet summer last year. This year will be hopefully much the same. So, these are all pretty good signs for us. A lot more rainfall, high humidity. The temperatures will be slightly higher than average, but that's just a sort of slightly higher than average, and that's a part of the sort of broader climate trends that are happening. But so we're likely to get fewer extreme days, probably some more thunderstorms perhaps, but in general we can look forward to a shorter fire season. So the real fire danger period this year will probably be measured in terms of weeks rather than months. So it'll be a sort of 6 weeks. But don't get lulled into this is all good news, but don't get lulled into the idea that we can't have fires, because we certainly can. And it really only takes 3 or 4 days of hot weather, hot northerly winds, dry conditions blowing from the north, high temperatures, low humidity, and it's game on. And we've seen that before in the hills where it only takes 3 or 4 days to tip things over, and all of a sudden we're into bushfire potential. So don't be, just because it's a more benign summer, don't be lulled into the idea that we won't get fires. There'll be fire somewhere. Okay, so let's have a bit of a chat about local vegetation. There are different sorts of vegetation around the hills, and Montrose in particular. If we think about the sorts of vegetation you've got down there, it varies from place to place depending where you are in the Montrose area. So in general, there are 2 sorts of vegetation in the Dandenongs. On the northwest facing side, which is the side that Montrose is on, and you look up against that northwest face of the hills, that's quite a dry and pretty flammable vegetation. There's a few stringy barks, a few peppermints. It's a mixed eucalypt forest. It has a scrubby undergrowth, pretty shallow soil for the most part, but it burns reasonably quickly, and it's also on a slope, and so those factors of dry vegetation, steep slope, and you chuck in some hot weather, and it's quite a fire-prone vegetation. You go to the other side of the hills, so once you get to the ridge area up around Kalorama and over the lip down towards Sylvan, for example, you're into a different sort of forest altogether. It's a mountain ash forest, single species, wetter, less prone to fire than the northwest face. But they're the 2 types. So basically the ridge line of the Dandenongs, or essentially the pathway that the Mount Dandenong Tourist Road follows, is the division between the 2. Clearly around some of those lower down areas, so the foothills areas, the vegetation is quite different, and you move into a more woodland area. So there are still significant pockets of bushland, and Rob will talk a bit later about those, because there are some specific areas in Montrose, in and around Montrose, aside from the western face of the hills, that are of interest and present some problems. So, and we think about the sort of local, we'll go into the local risks now. If you think about the local risks, and there's on the left-hand side of that screen, there's a slide or a photo that shows you the sort of sky high about Dandenong, Sheffield Road, up to Ridge Road. You get some idea of the diversity of landscape that we're dealing with in and around Montrose. So you've got quite steep mountain areas, you've got lower down, you've got large blocks in that Sheffield Road area, you've got some remnant farmland, some small allocations. And then you have quite suburban areas as you push over towards Mount Dandenong, or the Mount Dandenong Tourist Road end. There's places that are quite almost suburban. If you look to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a picture of the hills on fire. That's from 1997, and you can see that there's fire that stretches from Montrose on the left side to over to Upper Ferntree Gully on the right side. So you know, there's certainly fire history here. We've had fires where the entire ridge area has been on fire. And just in terms of local risks, otherwise, just picking out of those slides there, you can see that there are little bits of settlement which are just isolated in the bush. You have some pretty narrow tracks into some areas, and a sort of mixture of different sorts of vegetation. So you can see the sort of drier stuff to the north and the more verdant areas to the south in those two pictures in the middle. So let's think about what we've got here. We've got some houses perched out in the bush. We've got some just below the ridge line. We've got others that are clustered away from the bush in more sort of European style gardens, so different sort of vegetation altogether. We've got some bushy streets and streets where the houses are in the bush, and you've got some areas where, you know, you're pretty much in the suburbs. Don't think for a minute that just because you're in a nice suburban street, you're immune from the prospect of bushfire. And when Rob talks, he'll explain a bit about that, I'm sure. But I always remember the woman in Sydney who said, you know, my house shouldn't have burned down. I had a footpath, as if that was some sort of special barrier to their house catching fire. The risk, the thing that all homes in this area are at risk of is ember attack. So, you know, a few years ago there was some research done by a university in Sydney where they looked at, and they said essentially any house that was within 700 metres of a substantial area of bushland is at risk from ember attack. And so that's pretty much all of Montrose, I would suggest to you. There'll be a piece of vegetation somewhere within that footprint that will affect pretty much every home. And so other things that affect local risk around here are things like winding roads, you know, limited roads into and out of the area, lots of them passing through bush. We've got vegetation right up to the road edges. We've got extreme winds, falling trees. We've got the transition of vegetation types, so we go from one sort of vegetation into another. We've got poor mobile reception. We've got electrical infrastructure that's vulnerable to falling trees and that sort of thing. We've got high levels of tourism, so lots of day trippers, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of them out there today. And cyclists, we've got schools, school bus routes, and limited public transport. What does it mean? If there's a fire, we're going to have traffic congestion. We'll probably have loss of road access. We'll probably have loss of power. We'll potentially lose water. We'll possibly lose mobile phone coverage. You know, one of the big untested things that's ahead of us is what impact will the NBN have, because essentially once the NBN goes out for a lot of people, that means they'll lose their home phone line as well. So we've got some complications in terms of local risks here. Okay. You're really lucky in Montrose. You've got a fantastic brigade, a really committed brigade, and a well-run brigade, and quite a strong brigade. And so they're committed to providing you with a fire safety 24/7, 365 days of the year. So, but the reality is a bushfire, you have something like just shy of 2,500 properties and dwellings. You've got a population of 7,000, and the brigade has 4 vehicles. So do the maths there in terms of, do you reckon you're ever going to get a fire truck at your house during a bushfire? And I'll tell you the answer, that's probably not. If you're lucky, you'll get one in the street. That's not to say there won't be lots of fire trucks arriving, but what the fire brigade or the firefighting forces are trying to do here, the objectives are strategic. It's about stopping the fire spreading from one place to the next place. It's not about looking after your home in particular. So So if you have any idea that you think you're going to get a fire truck where there's a bushfire, you need to forget about that. Okay, what do we expect from fire? As we know, Victoria has lots of fires, and we saw that last year. We're one of the most fire-prone areas in the world, and most people only have experienced bushfire vicariously. They see it on the television, and that's how most of us experience it. So even people who live in relatively high-risk areas like this, you may or may not ever see a bushfire during the time you live here. You might see one or two in the extent of your life. So it's still an unusual experience for most people, and yet we want you to be acutely aware of the possibilities, particularly in areas like this, about what can happen and what you might need to do in those circumstances. So there are two aspects of fire that are really important to understand, and the first one of these is ember attack. I mentioned that earlier, that pretty much everywhere is subject to ember attack, and we talked about the fuel types around Montrose, so the drier fuel and the suburban fuel in the remnant farmland. So what I want to do now is ask Taryn if she'll just play this ember attack video, and we'll have a bit of a chat after that.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers like large pieces of burning ribbon bark hundreds of meters into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometers beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers traveled more than 30 kilometers ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways, and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realize the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Okay, so that's a pretty graphic animation around ember attack, and it's sometimes like that, and sometimes it's more like the second part of it. So you would have seen there was sort of fairly intense ember attack around the closer they were to the fire, but it's that longer distance stuff that often catches it out. And I always remember a friend of mine who was in bed one night after there'd been a relatively small fire up here in the hills, and someone knocked on his door and said, "Hey mate, your house is on fire," because little ember had lodged in the side of the wall, and 5 hours, 6 hours later, his house was starting to catch fire. So it's just something you need to be aware of. You don't want to be caught in it. It's unpleasant, and as I said, sometimes it's hours later. And there's just a few photos there you can see. So on the left-hand side, you've got a couple of examples of pretty intense ember attack. On the right-hand side are the sorts of things that happen. So they'll catch little bits of wooden decking and that sort of thing. I remember also another chap I knew whose doormat caught fire because he had a doormat on his decking, and it caught fire, and it actually burnt a perfect square where the doormat had been through the deck. So you can see just a couple of examples there of the sorts of little fires that start by ember, and unattended, they're the sorts of things that eventually will burn houses down. So you can see there's a little fire starting the vegetation next to the house in that bottom right-hand side thing, and the one in the centre there, the bottom part of the centre photos, you can see just a little fire that started in the garden. So again, just because you live in a relatively suburban part of Montrose, for example, don't be fooled into thinking it came to you. I remember on Black Saturday there were houses in Upper Ferntree Gully that were on the other side of the Burwood Highway from where the fire had started in Quarry Road, and they caught fire. Their gardens caught fire. Okay, so the second thing we want to actually talk about now in terms of big threats from fire is a lot of people think, during the bushfire people get burnt to death. It's actually not the fire that kills most people. Most people die from the effects of radiant heat. So radiant heat is the energy that's generated by the fire front, and we'll just have a look at this video that Taryn will stick up, and it pretty graphically illustrates the impacts of radiant heat.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. leaving early is always your safest option.
Okay, so again, another fairly graphic animation that indicates why radiant heat is so dangerous. So that's why we talk about putting a solid object between you and the fire. It's why we talk about being properly clothed if you're going to be outside during a bushfire, or if you're trapped outside during a bushfire, why adequate layers of clothing are important. And you can see just from that photo there, or those two photos there, the sort of impact that radiant heat will have on the side of a building. So on one side there's a building, you can see that the blind is pretty much melted down, the paintwork started to blister and crack. The other photo shows a road sign, a big road sign, and the impact that radiant heat has had on it. It hasn't actually been burnt directly, it's just the energy that's coming off the fire. So essentially we say, you know, you'll notice that firefighters wear the sort of full overalls, helmets, gloves, all that stuff. Essentially, you know, that will enable you to withstand radiant heat up to 4,000 kilowatts per metre. And basically 1 kilowatt per metre is the energy generated by a toaster. So 4,000 is 4,000 toasters, so that's a lot. Many fire fronts will generate, you know, energy levels in the 100,000 kilowatts per metre level. So, you know, being outside during a bushfire is not a great place to be. Okay, this is just some quotes from you know, after major fires, CFA goes out and interviews people about what was the experience like, and here is just 4 quotes from some of those interviews. You know, it was, you know, I couldn't stand in front of the heat for more than 2 seconds. That's at Coligny out in Gippsland. You know, it was a hailstorm of embers. It was like lighting up like Lucifer all around us. It was just like 5 minutes out there. I was 5 minutes out there. Holy hell, it's just like you're in hell. Everything's on fire around you. So you know, people have been through bushfires, often have responses like this. People who've been through bushfires might say, I would never do that again. And so that's what we're going to look at. Next is just some video clips from people who've been through that experience, and just to give some sense about why not being there is a good idea.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got out.
So again, you're hearing stories from people who've been there. One of those people would have been exceptionally well prepared and lots of experience, but still, you know, would not do that again simply because of the trauma that's involved. Particularly, bear in mind if you've got small children, they often experience things quite differently to adults, and you know, that's a long-lasting trauma that will be with them for the rest of their lives. So what does it mean for you? It'll be stressful and traumatic situation that you have to plan and be prepared for. So bear in mind that, you know, exit roads might be blocked, ember attack causes fires to spread quickly, radiant heat's the biggest killer. Your ability to make good decisions will be impacted by many factors. So let's do a quick poll at this point and see what do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions. Okay, let's go. So what do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions? And you have multiple answers here. Okay, we'll give you another 5 seconds. Okay, so here are the things that people have said. So 86% of people said stressed. So it's a very stressful situation. Just sitting here talking about it's stressful, let alone having to actually go through it. Rapidly changing situations. So 90% of people are saying that the situation will change rapidly. That's certainly the case in and around the hills, where we don't have a lot of time. You know, out in sort of more rural areas, you might have a few hours preparation time or a few hours notice that a fire's coming your way. Often around here, we have 10, 15, 20 minutes. Fire starts, the fire's already impacting homes within that short space of time. Things not going to plan. We heard some examples of that in the little video there. It only takes one thing to go wrong. So, you know, a tree comes down across the road when you think you can hang around a bit, just that little bit longer, and your plan's gone out the window. Not having enough time, that's certainly a factor up here. So we really need to be doing things that are sort of almost preemptive rather than waiting for a fire to start. We need to have been doing things and taking actions before we hit that point. Communication breakdown, you know, that's certainly a case in many parts of the Dandenongs and probably parts of Montrose as well, where the mobile reception is not so good. And heat, it's going to be sort of hot and unpleasant. Okay. How do you know if there's if there's a fire? So why don't we I might just get you to enter in the chat. How do you think you'd know if there's a fire in the Montrose area? So we'll just get you to enter some suggestions there in the chat. So someone's put up Big Emergency app, that's good. Smell, Big Emergency app. Big Emergency apps, sirens and smoke. Siren, smoke, radio, local radio. All good things. Okay, so we'll talk about some of those things specifically later, but it's good to see that there are some people who are relying on sensors, but also some people are relying on technology and some of the other information. Facebook page is another one. We'll go into some of those items in a couple of minutes' time. On your screen now, you've got a copy of the fire danger ratings, and we'll just do just a quick poll. What do you think this means? What does a fire danger rating sign mean? So you've got two options there. Okay, we'll just give you a few more seconds to put in an answer there. Okay, that'll do, Taryn, thanks. So, about 2/3 of people saying fire, the FDR is an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start, and about 1/3 of people saying it's an indication of how likely it is a fire will start. So the 2/3 is the sort of more correct answer. This is actually, these ratings are actually an indication of how hard it is to control a fire. So certainly by the time you move into the top 3, well, there are actually 7 ratings, which is, you know, a lot. And just by the by, this fire danger rating is currently being reviewed at a national level to see if it's too complicated or are there better ways to express it. So, but for the time being, you know, once you hit the severe, extreme, actually once you hit the top of the very high, severe, extreme and code red, these are indications of fires that will be very difficult to control. So if we just go to the next slide. Thanks, Taryn, please. So there are your 3 top rating areas. So severe is you can expect hot, dry, possibly windy conditions. If a fire starts, it may be uncontrollable. So severe is normally the point at which a total fire ban is called, and so that's another hint for you that today's going to be a bad fire day in this area. Extreme suggests that it's going to be extremely hot and dry and windy. If a fire starts and takes hold, it will be uncontrollable. So you know, intervention using fire trucks, aeroplanes, it's unlikely to contain the fire until some other intervention naturally takes place, i.e. it rains or the weather conditions otherwise moderate. So, and finally, code red is conditions under which homes are simply not designed to withstand that level. So code red is always an absolute trigger to leave the area. If you're in a fire, if you're in that sort of fire flume or the fire prone area, code red's an indication you just don't want to be there because the house itself won't withstand a fire in those areas. Okay. So just as a quick side, just as a quick poll, how many code red days do you think we've had in the central region in the last 5 years? Okay. Okay, there's just a few answers coming in there. We'll give it another 10 seconds, Tara. Okay, so about a third of you said there have been none, and that's the correct answer. So there really hasn't ever been a code red day in the Central District ever, not since. The last time there were conditions that were equivalent to code red would have been Black Saturday, and about a month later there was a day where the conditions spiked into code. Again, it's a calculation based on the conditions, but we've never actually had a code red day here. So if you're waiting for your code red to be your trigger to do stuff, you could be waiting another 10 years. So, all right, let's carry on and have a bit of a look at where you get information. So this is a slide just to indicate where you're getting information from. So how do we find out anything these days? And we get it from multiple sources, and there's so much information being pushed towards us. What do we trust? What do we not trust? You know, is what we see on Facebook right? Is what we see on Instagram right? Is what we hear down the shops right? What the neighbours tell us. So having to filter out that information, what's useful, is important, because a lot of this is really just in the context of bushfires is just white noise. We're not actually hearing stuff that's particularly accurate, useful. And in terms of making decisions based on what we're hearing from a range of these sources, it's not always the best way. So what we're looking for really is some sources where the information has been through a gatekeeper, where it's been filtered, where it has some sort of filter put over it that tells us that. So people talked earlier on about the Vic Emergency app, and it's a really good source of information. It will push notifications to you saying, you know, there's a fire going in such and such an area. And it's important because it gives you sort of warning about stuff that's happening in and around your local area. So on my app, if it tells me there's a fire in Montrose, I'm really interested in that because that means that at some point it might be heading up to the top of the hill. So there's a range of sources. So there's the Vic Emergency Hotline, there's online sources from EMV, there's agency social media, so Twitter and Facebook pages and accounts that are run by the agencies, by CFA or by DELT. They're a useful source of information. In extremis, you might get an emergency alert, which is the national telephone warning system. If you need to access an interpreter or a national relay service because of some other disability, that's there. And the top left-hand corner talks about local news. So in terms of local news, yes, it's going through a filter, but the best local news you can get using radio is probably through an emergency broadcaster. And the emergency broadcaster in this part of the world is ABC 774. There's some community radio stations that also perform that function, but really in terms of strength of signal and so on, the ABC is pretty good and pretty sound. And they will interrupt their broadcasting. They'll interrupt the cricket to update you with the latest info. So that's your suite of filtered or authorised channels of information. What sort of information you're going to get? Essentially, you're going to get one of the following three basic warnings. There's an advice warning, there's a watch and act, and there's an emergency warning. So advice is simply an indication that there's some information that some incident's occurring or has occurred in your local area. And it can also be used to tell you that something's no longer happening. So that's the basic level. Watch and act is the next level up, and there's an emergency developing nearby, and you actually need to do something now. You need to take some action to protect yourself and others. And the final level is emergency warning, which means that you're in imminent danger and you need to take action and you're going to be impacted. Now, you don't necessarily get them all in this nice, neat order of advice, watch and act, emergency warning, and often around this part of the world, we're going to go straight to emergency warning because that's the time lapse that's involved in how quickly things develop. So don't be expecting to roll out nicely in a nice ordered fashion. You might only just get the one warning, or you might get two of them in quick succession. There's a couple of other forms of warning. One's an evacuation. Unlikely we'll get one around this part of the world simply because you don't have a time. There were some huge evacuation warnings issued last year, and so Gippsland had evacuation warnings to leave East Gippsland, and the Northeast also had them. So unless there's a sort of preemptive time lag that enables those to be issued, then they won't be. And so, as I say, around here, it's unlikely because we're not sort of going to move people out of the hills holus bolus. But you need to be aware that an evacuation warning has a specific meaning, and particularly if you're travelling, if someone tells you to evacuate an area, it's pretty good advice to do that. You think back to last year, a whole bunch of people decided not to leave Malakuta and they were stuck. And so eventually they had to be moved out by ship or by aircraft. So just think about that when you receive an evacuation warning. It'll be well in advance of any danger. And so you might want to think about heeding that. And finally, there are community information notifications that are basically tell you, it might be that there's a community meeting happening. It might be just general information about what's going on. So the important thing here is not to wait for a warning. So you need to be out actively gathering information about what's going on, particularly in this part of the world. You might be well ahead of any warnings that you receive. So someone mentioned earlier about using their sensors, and that's where you might see the fire before the warning's issued. So, it takes sometimes several minutes for a warning to be developed. The fire's reported to 000. 15 minutes later, the fire started. The advice message might not be released for more than 15 minutes. Well, around this part of the world, I can tell you it only takes about 20 minutes from fire to go from the bottom of the Dandenongs to the top of the ridge. And if it's going to be 30 minutes before you get your emergency warning, it's all taking just a little bit too long, as you can see. So I was really pleased to see in the chat people talked about using their sensors. So have a look, listen for things like sirens, and use the nose for smelling smoke. So that's probably the most effective intelligence you're going to get around the Dandenongs, is to actually use your sensors listening for sirens, listening for other indicators other than looking at your telephone and waiting for someone to send you a formal warning. Okay, so we're going to quickly move into planning and decision making, and again we're just going to have a little bit of a scenario exercise here, and so we're going to do some polling, and we'll ask, so again you know we'll be asking you to participate. So it's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. When you look outside and you can see it's already hot and windy, the morning news is reporting that today's a day of extreme fire danger. So we're into that high level of risk. You get in your car, shoot off to work, or you go shopping, or whatever your activity for the day is, and you can see, you know, little branches and leaves and stuff falling from the trees as you're driving out. It's about lunchtime, and you overhear people talking about a fire that started near Sheffield Road. So you jump on the Vic Emergency app and find out what's going on and see what's happened. And you see it's a little bit from your house. So you get in your car and you start heading home to make sure that everything's okay. And as you get closer to home, you find that the road's been blocked by police. You wind down your window and they say, "I'm sorry, it's too dangerous to go any further into the areas. There's a fire still burning, there are trees down." So you'll have to find somewhere else to go if the road's reopened. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions about this. So where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? So we'll get the polls going. So work, home, holiday, shopping. And then thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you needed to spend a few nights away from home? Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. Okay, so we can see that about 2/3 of people are at home on an average Wednesday in summer, and about 1/3 of people at work. So that's sort of interesting. So a fair chunk of people at home, and that will affect the sort of things that you do once a fire started. But if you're at work, you might be thinking about coming back. So think about last summer. Would you have been prepared if you needed to spend a few nights away from home? And about what have we got? About 47% of people saying yes, they would be, and 31% saying no, they wouldn't be. Okay, so it's just one more question we're going to ask you there about, oh, there we go. Did you have an emergency kit packed? And that's great to see that some people have an emergency kit packed with important documents, photos to take away. I mean, one of the things you need to think about, particularly in a high-risk area, is whether you actually pack up stuff before summer and move it out. So put it in a storage bin or send it to someone, relative or friend's house who doesn't live in the area. And the things that people miss most after their homes are destroyed are things like photos, important documents. Might be a piece of precious jewellery. It could be, you know, a particular painting. But there's always a few things, and pretty much you can pack them into sort of 2 or 3 cardboard boxes. The really essential things that are going to make life a lot easier if it all goes absolutely pear-shaped. So we just return to the next hypothetical situation. So it's the same day, except this time when you jump onto the Vic Emergency Act, you see the fire's app that said the fire is still a fair way away from your place. So you think to yourself, I've got time to run home and grab some important stuff. So as you get into the car, you can smell smoke, it's still really windy. You check on the app and you see the little yellow triangle saying it's just an advice message, so you should still have time. So you quickly go home and collect some things. Okay. every now and again you have a look outside, see things are all right. Then you check on your phone, see you're being told to evacuate. No, nothing's happening. It's still just an advice message. You're running through your list in your head, you know, pets, photos, birth certificate. It's taking a bit longer than you think it should to collect up all these things. And you notice little patches of smoke coming up from the garden bed, and embers have started to fall near your home. You feel that the surge of adrenaline's pumping through your body, but you're out of time. So now what do you do? What are you going to do? And in the chat, just put in what's one thing you would have done differently in this scenario. Anybody? What would you have done differently to avoid being in this scenario? Not gone home? Good answer. Had important things already in the car so there was no need to go home. That's a good answer also. Not gone home. Yeah, so there's some good thinking there. And really, as I said, one of the best things in these circumstances is to not have that really important stuff there. So two things that you might want to think about doing is packing up those things ahead of the fire season, just having them somewhere else so they're not at risk. And the second thing you need to think about is, and that will negate the necessity to go, and think about pets. So where are your pets on extreme bushfire days? Have you got them somewhere safe? Can they be moved to somewhere that's less at risk? And another thing you need to think about is make sure you've got adequate insurance. So one of the things that happens after bushfires is that people often don't have enough insurance, and so it's worth giving that some consideration. Okay, so I reckon what we're going to do now is just summarise some of the things we've looked at, because we're about to run out of time. This is why people are always urging you to have a plan ahead of the fire season. Don't think ahead, make a plan before summer starts. Download the Vic Emergency app, learn how to prepare your property by attending a bushfire planning workshop. Okay, so next, survival options if your plan fails. And I don't want to go into too much detail about this, because this is the sort of thing that you need to think about more carefully and perhaps attend a bushfire planning workshop. But if your plan has failed and you find yourself in a bushfire, you need to make sure that you're covered up. We talked about radiant heat earlier, so these are the sorts of things you need: a hat, eye protection, mask, natural fibre clothing, so cotton, wool, those sorts of things, tough leather gloves, sturdy boots or socks if you're going to have to actually survive through a fire front unexpectedly. So you need to have that stuff ready to go as well. Sheltering behind some solid object may provide some protection. So that's protection from radiant heat, and if possible, find somewhere that's a bit safer. So, you know, sometimes in places like Montrose, it might actually be in the main shopping strip rather than because you're not going to have a river. You might have a dam. Stationary cars provide minimal protection in most areas. If you're in the bush, you might be lucky enough to find a ploughed paddock or a reserve. And, in some locations, there'll be a neighbourhood safer place, which is often just a footy ground. And I don't think they're all there. I know there are none in Montrose. So don't be banking on having one of those nearby. Thanks, Karen. Okay. This is why you don't want to be caught on the road. So, particularly it's going to be dark. You won't be able to see where you're going. You can hit a tree and have an accident, and that's clearly what's happened in one of those photos. There's been an accident, but driving towards that sort of scenario is not somewhere you want to be. You just don't want to be on the roads. Cars are not designed to save you from bushfires. They're designed to get you from A to B. So that's why it's important to have a plan. Okay, we're going to turn next to Rob and quickly run through some areas of local interest in Montrose. So Rob, over to you.
Thanks very much, John. Welcome and good morning to you all. And it's great to see some familiar faces on here in the participants, but also great to see just out of the polling too that we've got newer members of our community wanting to gain more knowledge about being fire safe this summer. So that's great to see. The first thing I just wanted to do before we actually just touch into some of the slides and talk about some of our reserves and fire risk areas is the Montrose Brigade has responded to 175 calls this year. That includes the extended fire season that we've had, and we spent a fair bit of time throughout the southeast, southwest of Victoria, down through Mallacoota. We spent time through New South Wales and also Queensland. So throughout Australia, we do have a very, very, very fire-prone continent. We're lucky and lucky to live in a beautiful part of Victoria in Montrose, and we have, but that comes with challenges. So I've got some slides to show you very, very soon, just to display some of our local reserves that also show an overview of the bushland, and then we can start talking about some of the challenges with those areas. So I'll just flick through to the next slide. So for the people that are familiar with our area, I'm just going to touch on some of the local reserves. And the first one I want to talk about is the Lavertia Reserve. Lavertia Reserve, I don't actually have an overview of the topography here, but it is certainly a sloping landscape here. For the people that don't know where this area is, up onto the top slide, there is a yellow road called Canterbury Road that leads up into the heart of Montrose. On the right-hand side, we have the quarry of Montrose, and then through neighbouring streets, through Ashgrove, through to Grattan and Sheffield Road, we actually have a reserve called Lavertia. That Lavertia Reserve does have a sloping topography, so it does slope up when you hit the top ends of the street, and it also slopes down when you head down to Sheffield Road too. It actually is a quite unique reserve. It is absolutely beautiful for bushwalkers, for mountain bike riders to walk through there, but certainly poses high fuel loading, and certainly a different type of topography when you actually go down to the creek area too. So when you look at what a northerly wind would actually do to this area here, and if it did come through from the north, I started off from around the Crestview Kirkwood area, that would push a fire down towards Sheffield Road. Now, you can't actually see it there because it's not actually articulated, but we actually do have a school there too. So along Sheffield Road, we actually have Billanook Primary. Billanook Primary sits up onto the northern face of the Dandenongs too. And Sheffield Road is a particular challenging road too, because it is a very small, narrow road. I know they are widening the road as we speak at the moment, but it is very, very tight. You can imagine if we did actually have a fire there on a significant day around school pickup time. We all know the challenges of Sheffield Road, picking up kids, but you actually might find on a particular day, we might actually have 200 to 300 cars travel through there between the hours of 1500 to 1600 on a weekday, and also in the morning too. So that does pose some challenges. We also had numerous trees down, and I'll just talk a little bit the ones that we have responded to locally as well. But over the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've had some significant trees down in the area. Even recent, going back to the start of October. We know in some of these areas, particularly in the Cambridge Road, the Sheffield Road, we do have a lot of trees that actually overhang the roads and pose some challenges when they do go down. We have had numerous trees down in the area posing blocked roads, and that could be a major challenge for residents that actually live in that area, especially along Sheffield Road. So in this particular area, we do have a lot of stringy barks. We do have a lot of natives, and we have a lot of growth, particularly at the top end of the Lavertia Reserve, and that faces the adjoining blocks. Now, we do have some clearing around some of the properties and around the perimeter of the reserves, but this is a reserve certainly to be aware of in high risk areas. And if you are in and around this area, especially not just if you're back onto the reserve, but if you you are 2 or 3 streets across, certainly this is one to certainly keep in mind, just because of the ember attack and spotting. We'll just go to the next one. Richards Road Reserve. This is actually quite an interesting reserve. I'm not sure for the ladies and gentlemen that have been in Montrose for 10 years plus. This used to have a lot of pine trees in the area. It was removed probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and we've got a lot of natives in there. So now we've got a lot of vegetation that is that would certainly burn really quickly. But there is a fair bit of clearing around these properties too, but certainly around the King Street area, the Kerr Crescent, and also you know, neighbouring streets like Belvedere and Heathfield Road. There's certainly areas in there that you would want to make sure that your properties are well prepared, and also you had a well-versed fire plan. Throughout the reserve, it will burn pretty quickly. The nature of these the plantations there will burn quick, and you will get a fair bit of spotting from this area. Certainly, just make sure you need to have a well-versed fire plan, but also make sure too that don't be complacent, even if you live up on Sheffield Road North too, that you need to ensure that you are prepared for a fire that may start in and around this area. The next one is brickworks. Over the last 3 weeks, you know, we have had significant trees down, massive trees down. The council is working very hard at the moment to clear a lot of trees, a lot of fire loading, especially in brickworks. It has been closed off to the public for probably about 2 weeks. But we usually got responded to about 2 weeks ago. I'll just tell you just a brief story where we went to a motor vehicle accident on Cambridge Road where a tree came down and hit a vehicle. The person was trapped. We were able to free the person. But throughout that storm, we had trees dropping. They are seriously dangerous. You do not hear when they are coming down. So that also, I want people to think about that when clearing your property, and make sure that you can get some advice from council about the trees that you're able to remove safely, and clear your property, not just from protection of fire, but also any ones that the soil erosion looks a little bit weary. I would recommend getting some specialists in there and learning a little bit more about what to remove and what's safe and what's not. But in brickworks, we actually have a pipeline that goes onto the northern side, the southern side there, between sort of Cambridge Road and Montrose Road. That continues all the way up to the reserve up in Montrose. Certainly, you know, when you look at some fire activity within this area, I would certainly have a well-versed fire plan for your Belfast Road, and definitely your Cambridge Road and the back ends of the properties that sit on sort of Trevellyn and Tea Tree Court, sorry, not Tea Tree, on all the courts that live off Montrose Road, including Walnut, Chestnut. Montrose Road, the recreational reserve in Montrose. We heard from John to say before that we don't actually have a place of neighbourhood safe in Montrose. So even in Montrose, the recreational reserve, you'd think that you would, but we actually don't in this area. We do have places that are probably a little bit more safer than others, like the middle of the football ground or at the town centre. But certainly, we live in a beautiful area, but there's certainly risks that come with it. When we talk about this area here, and if you have walked through the reserve there and the football ground, beautiful area, lots of natives. It does have a lot of trees and bushland that's interconnected with pathways through there. Certainly, if we did have a bad fire in that area, it will burn, and it will burn very, very quickly. We have had some fires in the reserve over the last 10 years that we've been able to pull up and stop pretty quickly. But it hasn't been the days of extreme fire behaviour. We do have a lot of water and access within those areas through hydrants and so forth, but and access to the roads around the perimeter of there, but it's certainly, you're not going to be excluded from ember attack. So, from the residents that live around the Yeaman, the Stephen Avenue, and the Timberglades area and Patricia Avenue, certainly you need to have a well-versed fire plan. And also some of the areas that live off, just live off the tourist road there too. If we do have a fire that starts in the area there, and we have a southerly change too, that could impact the township of Montrose. So having a plan is good. Having a plan A is fantastic. Having a plan C is even better, but don't just rely on those, because fires, not one will burn the same. The major one that we have in terms of fire risk area is the face of the Dandenongs, the north faced, northern western face. Certainly, it is a little bit green up there at the moment. There's not as many trees down than what we had in the storm damages than I expected. We actually have a lot more trees down in Lavertia and the lower parts of the reserves in Montrose than what we actually do on the Dandenongs. Still a lot of trees down, but not as significant damage. These areas here, and I'm probably just speak a little bit out of school with the mountain bike riders and also the bushwalkers, that we have a lot of activity through here throughout the summer. It is beautiful walking through there. It is quite peaceful when you walk up there, but we do have a lot of activity from tourists and the people that like to walk the tracks through there. Not that anyone can drive through the Dandenongs because it's national park. However, there are certainly going to be trees down there. When you do have high winds in the areas, they will fall and you won't hear them. But the challenging thing about this area here is a fire doesn't actually need to start in the foothills of the Dandenongs to actually pose a risk to it. Think about Queen Reserve, think about Lavertia Reserve, or any of the other reserves within Montrose. On days of significant wind, we could have ember attack from any of those areas, posing risks to the challenges of the Dandenongs, and then hopefully not impacting John's beautiful town of Sassafras and Alinda up the top. They are beautiful areas, but you do need to have a plan, and you also need to understand that the road network around these areas on Ridge Road, Mount Dandenong Road, Sheffield Road, Glasgow, these are challenging roads for the amount of vehicles and population we actually have. And also, throw in, dozens and dozens and dozens of fire trucks that may need to enter into the area. That is certainly going to pose significant challenges for us responding into the area as well. John showed some beautiful photos of the area, showed some images of fire, ember and attacks, and actually driving through those roads. And certainly when you are on the roads and you are faced with an ember attack, it is actually quite dangerous. One vehicle that is impacted by an accident could potentially challenge a lot of people held up in a fire on these particular roads too. So having a plan, preparing your properties is really important, but also not being there on days of significance is also very important not to be there. So.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Some great insights then around some local areas, and having done a few school pickups down at Billanook, I fully comprehend the risks and the dangers of that little stretch of the world. So some really good advice there from your local captain about things to look out for. Okay, so let's just finish up now. We need to sort of think about, because we're running a little bit over time, but we need to think about things to do. So there's lots of resources available. We've done a big brain dump this morning of a whole lot of information, and we haven't given you all the answers, and we've only given you some of the answers. So there's much more to learn and understand if you want to protect yourself, your family, and your property from fire. So there's a bunch of resources that are available on the CFA website. There's some workshops you can do in terms of writing a plan to prepare your property and your family for the possibility of bushfire. If you haven't downloaded the Vic Emergency app, that's almost a must-do for people living in this area. And you know, there's always the opportunity to connect with your local brigade and the community. And I'm sure the door at Montrose is open always, as it is at most CFA stations. So contact your local brigade. So there's just one final thing we want to do, is one final poll we want. Oh, there's some contact information, sorry, for North East Region District 13, which is at Lilydale, so not very, or at Churnside Park these days, not very far away. So there's a general number there, and you can email District 13 Community Education. In an emergency, always dial 000. Okay, so we've got one final poll to take, I think, Taryn.
We'll need to get people to write their answers in the chat.
In the chat, okay. So, so I just want you to, just a couple of questions. Did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risk in your local area? Just a yes or no, or confirm what I already knew. And would you recommend this program to friends and neighbours that live in a fire-prone area? That'd be great if you could give us some responses to those two questions. And I think, Taryn, we're going to stick around for a little bit if people have further questions. So, you know, that's the end of the presentation as such. But I think, Rob, you and I are happy to hang around if people have some further questions they might want to ask, and we'll do our best to respond to them. So thanks very much for your attendance. There's a final slide there about if this has raised any issues for anyone. So there's some information there about who to contact. But thanks, and thanks for hanging in there right to the end too. It's great.